So I sort of describe myself nowadays as a well-being catalyst, and I think that's because I'm probably on about my sixth or seventh different career nowadays. So it's very hard to bring up, all what I've done in my professional life, to bear. But my background was in the pharmaceutical industry, not working in oncology, but working in neurosciences. So I used to run migraine stroke research for Glaxo, and had a leadership role, and that's how I got into coaching. Because actually my job as a leader wasn't so much what I knew anymore, and particularly around the technical areas that I had expertise in. It was how could I help people around me bring their expertise in the best way and work as a team to solve difficult problems and such. So I got really interested in coaching. I'm a physiologist by pharmacologist by training many years ago, but I've taken additional sort of training in psychology. I'm a scientist, so a bit geeky and all that type of thing. I like to know how things work. And my interest in coaching came from, well, how can we sort of create the optimum circumstances for people to be at their best and perform at their best in a team? As ever, with my technical background, that means I collect the certifications as I go along the way, because that's how we're trained in the medical and technical professions. It's all about our continual professional development. So there's a number of professional affiliations that I'm sort of involved with. So I'm a member of the EMCC, and I run the Health and Wellbeing Special Interest Group for them. That's the European Mentoring and Coaching Council. I certified as a medical coach, and I'll come on to some of the certifications and regulation as we go along. I also trained in a whole variety of different sort of somatic approaches. Has anybody used heart math? Yeah. How's heart math? Was it useful for yourselves?
Good.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because the more we can sort of bring our attention, to how we're breathing and training ourselves to do that. Heart math, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is a very simple biosensor that you put on your ear or on your finger, and it helps you train how to use your breath in a way that brings you back to a state of coherence. And there's another app that's just been published by them, which I think is free at the moment, called Syntropy States. And Catherine, I can send you the login details for that afterwards, if you like. But that means you don't need the biosensor. It's just an app you can have on your phone, which helps you pace your breathing at a 10-second cycle, so 6 breaths per minute or so. And that can bring you back into a state of coherence. And I think you've probably done lots of breath work with people in the resilience room. Breathing's good is a general physiology term. But if we can do it with consciousness, that's even better. I trained as a hypnotherapist to get into coaching, so I have a whole way of sort of working with people around imagination. It's interesting because words are important. Words that we use create worlds. And I think what we often do as a coach is just offer maybe different perspectives or help people challenge or understand or just question the words and the beliefs that we may be working that you may be working with in a certain area. Because of my background in industry, I'm sort of a member of the Business Psychology Society, and I'm just recently got myself involved with the National Wellness Institute in the US, where some of the regulation takes part for health and wellness coaches, and I sit on the Multicultural Competency Committee, and I think that's kind of an interesting perspective because when people who are impacted by cancer, that's kind of a real enormous social demographic. So the impact it creates on people's lives, and really trying to support people in the working world to understand and have better awareness and understanding of that really fits this multicultural competency. So I'm a member of the Fountain Centre, but I also do some voluntary work for Icarus Charity. So the Fountain Centre, I did see somebody there from Guildford when everybody said hello. Has anybody used the Fountain Centre services? If you're in the Guildford area, I would highly recommend them. They're a brilliant bunch of people. It provides information, complementary therapies and emotional support to anybody, and I'll get this wrong, but in the Surrey and Sussex area, I think some of Hampshire as well. And Catherine, you probably know better than I in terms of the catchment areas for these groups. But it's anyone impacted by cancer in the medical care of St Luke's. Quite a large population of users, quite a high number of referrals coming through. We started the service there in 2014 through the complementary therapy. So it was a colleague of mine, Eugenia Olivada, who was a Reiki practitioner on the centre, and just had this conversation with the staff there around what if we brought coaching in, because I think that, you know, the staff at the centre and Eugenia were very conscious of the fact that actually there's an awful lot going on for people as individuals navigate you know, the process from you know, detection through diagnosis, through treatment, through post-treatment. And actually, would a coaching approach make any difference for people, was the question we sort of had. And then Eugenia went back to South America and invited me to go down and sort of have conversations with the wonderful team down there, Charlotte McDowell and Anne Pike. And that's how the coaching service started. And we were very cognizant of the fact of, well, you know, we didn't want to add extra burden to people, because it's like, go and try this other therapy, go and try, you know, these other things. What we really wanted to do was to, you know, to start slowly and then really build the service that was aligning to the benefit it was bringing to people. And 8 years later, we've got about 9 or 10 volunteer coaches now, and Health Education England has got very interested in the service that we've created, and have funded a PhD student there to sort of evaluate and create standards for coaching in cancer in the UK. And I'll come on to that a little bit more as we go through. So in the service, there's more women than men. Most are over 40, although they do have a children and family service. And the most frequent cancers, I think when we looked a few years ago, were breast cancer, gynecological and prostate. So that just gives you hopefully a flavour of the people going through the service and the support that we can sort of provide for people. So we're hopefully from that, I'm trying to get over the message that we're an experienced team. So the centre's been operating for about 20 years, 21, 22 years now. And, you know, Charlotte was one of the founders, but now Anne is the head, and I think she has a role as the co-clinical lead for personalised care and support in the community. We have a coaching coordinator, Eileen, and Natalie is the research coordinator for the centre, and Andrew Marin is the university student I mentioned, and hopefully his PhD will finish this year or next year. And start publishing some of the findings that they've had. But from what I understand, because we haven't really been too heavily involved in the evaluation of the service, because they wanted to keep it separate from the professionals, there's some quite excitement at the moment around what we've been able to achieve there in the style of coaching. And so what I'd like to do today really is share some of the perspectives that we've created in the Fountain Centre around how coaching in cancer can work. Just to say there are other views, other coaches are available, as they say, but what I'll hopefully get down to is some of the principles that we operate to as coaches, how you can find coaches, and perhaps importantly, how, you know, some just different things that you can use if you're going to select a coach, you know, some of the things to watch out for, or what might be useful for you. We also have, if anybody's here from an organisational perspective, not quite sure, you know, what we have. Anne and Eileen, Natalie and Charlotte were very gracious to outline the story of the coaching service on an EMCC podcast that's available to the wider community. And if you follow that link, which I think is on the slides I sent you, Catherine, you can get access to 3 podcasts of about 15-20 minutes each, around how it started, how we scaled the service, and what they're doing now. We're trying to bring standards in. I'll just pause there. Any questions?
There is a quick question in the chat, Andrew, about at the moment, are most of the Fountain Centre services remote, like via Zoom or on the telephone, or are they face-to-face? Do you know what proportion of which?
I don't. That's a great question. I know they do have in-person services started again. I'm just because I'm not in person there anymore. I'm less at favour with what's going on a day-to-day basis. So I work virtually now, although I did used to go into the Fountain Centre every week, which was quite a trek around the M25 for me, based in Hertfordshire. But they do have services, in-person services operating again. I'm just not quite sure which ones are there. Coaching is now face-to-face in the centre. And I think they are recruiting additional coaches to work face-to-face in the centre again now.
But there's a mix of online and
Yeah.
yeah. I think
so. Particularly for coaching, it's face-to-face there, or virtual or online.
Yeah, I think that's true for most of the kind of local cancer charities now. There probably is a bit of a mix, and people are, whether it's a Maggie's Centre or whether it's a local service. I think it's probably worth inquiring, because it probably now is a time when things are beginning to shift and change. But I think a lot of places have found that for some people they prefer the online stuff. So I think it may, So I think the actual Fountain Centre is location specific, isn't it? I think you need to be being treated at St Luke's Centre, which it takes quite a large catchment area, but it is the Surrey, Sussex, Hampshire, those sorts of areas where you would be going to St Luke's, which is the cancer centre attached to the Royal Surrey County Hospital in Guildford. But other areas, so in Bristol we've got a Macmillan Centre at Southmead Hospital, which is called a Macmillan Wellness Centre. I know that there's the Wessex Cancer Trust, which is if you're in Bournemouth, or those sorts of areas. So it's worth finding out if there is a local charity serving your particular area. But I think the Fountain Centre is quite unique in having coaches as part of that. I've not heard of coaching specifically being part of many of these other services.
No, I'm very, very proud that we were one of the first to bring this in. Actually, I think it's all about innovation. That's my world. But I'd encourage you to ring up and just gain support there. And actually, it's a really important point, Catherine, because I think when we started, there was some skepticism around would coaching work virtually. So, in my professional role as a coach, I often work with people I've never met. And back in the day, before we had Zoom and all these wonderful technologies, which makes it so much easier to work remotely, I used to work with people in different parts of my organization all over the globe, and only by phone. So I'd never seen them, but we'd created a relationship on the phone that was useful for them to sort of challenge their perspectives and move on, or create some difference in their world. And I think one thing the pandemic has done is just show that actually there is some opportunity there to provide these services from a virtual perspective. So I think that's great learning. So I work virtually with the centre nowadays, and I think this is a really powerful feedback that we got from one of our clients through the coaching service. Now, and a great definition of coaching, because it provides support and guidance to help you understand where you are now and focus on ways to live in the present and move forward, whatever your circumstances. And I'll just pause there for a moment, because I think that is exactly what we do as coaches. And the first thing to put out there as a coach, I have absolutely none of the answers. So, and that's quite a liberating thing for us to work as coaches, because our role as a coach is not for us to provide the answer, but for you to create that space where you've learned what's useful for you in that moment, and find how you can progress and move on. We may provide guidance, which is some experiences. So exactly we were discussing around the heart math. The Fountain Centre does have some heart math biosensors that were donated by the organisation. So we might suggest, try these exercises, try these things. Have you thought about thinking about this? The Penny Bra Wellness Wheel would be a great tool for us to work with as a coach, because it helps us zero in certain areas that might be useful for us to have a conversation around. And the other thing I would just say is that actually the work we do in the centre is coaching. So it is a cancer coaching service, but most of us in the centre, we wouldn't call ourselves cancer coaches per se, because we work holistically with the person. And I think that was a very strong message that came from your side there, Catherine, is because we only ever find ourselves where we are, and all aspects of our lives are what we work with, and we can come on to that in a little bit more detail around what are the things that some of the benefits or some of the areas of the topics we work with. And I think as coaches, one of the things that we do as coaches, or building a coaching approach in our work or as a professional, is enable people to sort of build skills and develop skills to meet those challenges in your life. And I think that context of coaching then fits across all sorts of different areas, irrespective of the challenge, because in many ways, the challenge is not the important part of what we're working with. It's how does the individual build the resources to meet them. So I've worked across charities with supporting people with a number of medical conditions, but the basic process that we operate to is the same. And I'm going to come on to that next, actually. So thank you for that. That was a wonderful setup for my next slide. Professional coaches, and we run supervision sessions there. So I was the first supervisor, but Jackie Arnold and Sue Jackson were the other supervisors of the service. And what we did as a team was actually put together the question, well, what is it we do? And, you know, we all work slightly differently as professional individuals, but what are the common things in our work? And I think you can see there from the feedback we had from Anna, that, you know, that coaching works beyond just the immediate scope of what's going on for you with your cancer diagnosis. It sort of provides skills for you to adapt in different, in perhaps all the elements of your life. And, you know, some very, very powerful feedback for us there. And through that process, this was our pandemic project, I guess, in many ways, because we wrote a book as a team in 2020. And I'll send a copy of the book to the library at Pennybrawn once, was it Louise, Catherine, gets back to me with where to send it. So have a look. It's written for practitioners, but the feedback I've had from people in the centre is that our clients find it quite useful as well, because it just creates some areas for individuals to think about and around these pillars of empowerment. You know, so the first one is awareness, the second one is information, and the third one is learning. And I think one of the things that we get through in the process of our professional role as coaches is help people sort of raise awareness around where they are, some of the assumptions that they may be making about where they are, some of the assumptions or the beliefs they have, which may not be kind of so useful for them in that moment, reframing them to something that might kind of be a more useful orientation for the moment. Maybe also creating awareness around, you know, some of the patterns of thought or some of the, you know, the categories, the categorizations of how we think. And it's just really, you may hear coaches talk about one of our roles is to be the mirror. So it's just somebody who's independent, who is with you in a totally confidential place, you know, which is of course always conditional, because if there's a risk of harm to others or self, then of course, you know, that confidentiality may be discussed. But we're there for the individual in that space, of creating them a safe place to think. And it can create just a little bit of a conversation then around, so what are you assuming there? You know, what could you do differently? What's going to be useful for you right now? There may be all these things that, you know, thinking ahead of all the uncertainties that we have, and we can't manage them, but what can we do right now? What can we do that's going to be useful today? And just having somebody who's alongside you in that regard can be really powerful. As I said, we may provide information like heart math or EFT or some other approaches that many of us are actually trained in as coaches at the Fountain Centre. But really, information doesn't result in anything unless we create a learning environment. And, you know, that learning can be kind of sometimes very transformational, because it could mean that people actually, you know, have some different perspectives or develop the skills to navigate, you know, whatever might be going on for them in that moment. And hopefully you'll see that reflected in the feedback from Anna. I'll just pause there again. Any thoughts, any questions around that?
Somebody's asking what EFT is, and I'm just going to pop in the we do the Pennybrawn every Tuesday. It has something called your self-care toolbox or toolkit, where we explore some of these different techniques that you can use and learn to practice yourself. And there are practitioners and things. So emotional freedom technique is what EFT stands for, and it is quite a useful self-help technique, often used to help manage anxiety and to help. But Andrew can tell us a bit more about it. But I would really recommend, if people want very practical experience of these things, to check out our regular free Tuesday session, which is specifically around some of these different self-care tools that people can learn and use for themselves. And maybe if anybody here in the audience has gone into any of those sessions, they could give a bit of information about what they've learned. That would be useful.
Yeah, has anybody used EFT? Yeah, and the hypnotherapy training in me really comes in here, because again, it's a really powerful tool for just sort of reframing and really using, you know, the physical nature of us and our imagination to sort of be useful for us in the moment. So EFT, just to add to that, Andrew, is just a tapping process, and it developed through an individual called Gary Craig, I believe, who sort of built it from a traditional Chinese medicine perspective, and it came through west coast of America. But in the States, it got real popularity because it became a powerful intervention for some of the Vietnam veterans, and it's been used quite a lot with trauma. And you know, I'm an EFT practitioner, and I integrate that with my coaching approach. It's a wonderful information piece for help, for just saying, is this useful to you? You know, is this a process that could be really powerful? And I think that comes on to, oh, sorry, was there any other questions there, Catherine? I put the chat box up at the same time.
Yes, I know, it's tricky. I think somebody just saying, can you recommend some of these skills? Because many of us won't be able to access the Fountain Centre. So, I mean, I do think, but you can all access the online Penny Bron services where some of these will be taught. We do also have an introduction to hypnosis, and I'll put the link for that in as well. But if people don't know how to find the services, that we've got a weekly program, so there's something going on every day around in this sort of area, as relaxation, breathing, self acupressure, EFT, those sorts of things. And hypnosis is a new thing, and we're doing various bits of mindfulness as well. So there is lots to help you, and I think it is just a question of finding someone, because I think it's sometimes about the technique, but it's also sometimes about the person and the teacher and the style that you like, and just try a few things out and see what resonates with you.
I totally endorse that. Some of these techniques are really powerful. And, you know, and for me, often what I say to my clients is, you know, my role here is to bring a bag of tools. And, you know, in my professional practice, I've developed all sorts of different tools in my toolbox. But I'm a tool lending agency. I don't know if the tool's going to work for you. All I can do is offer it. And if it's not working, well, we find another one. So the more you can sort of, you know, explore, and I think you've got some fantastic services in Penny Bron actually with the EFT and things. I'd really recommend you to go and explore and have conversations, with multiple practitioners, because actually it's a very relational thing. And there's, you know, absolutely no shame in saying to a coach or a practitioner, do you know what? I'd really like to work with somebody else, because actually we're there for you, and you know, finding the right person for yourself is really, really key. Change and transition. This is kind of a business model that we often work with in the business world, around, you know, change and managing change. Because, you know, change is something that happens to us, and it can be very dramatic and really unexpected and totally unwanted. But it's how we sort of integrate that and move through this zone of confusion, this neutral zone, to create that new beginning. And I think the pandemic in many ways has been, again, another really interesting example of how this happens to many of us in our lives. And perhaps it just created that sort of sense of uncertainty on a much wider scale. And I think, you know, helping people deal with this uncertainty from the, you know, the change from the old through this place of this neutral zone, in as Bridges called it, this zone of frustration and disorientation, to create that new whatever's next, that integration of change. I think that's a really powerful place that we operate in as coaches, and particularly because we don't know the answers, but we're really trying to help you as the individual, as our client, you know, make sense of where you are in the moment and integrate that change into the, you know, the new you, if I can use that terminology.
That's a lovely phrase, and it really ties in with the sort of essence of Penny Bron. And I don't know, for people who don't know, Penny Bron herself was one of the co-founders of the centre, and she had a diagnosis of breast cancer, but she was also in a previous life a social worker and had trained in traditional Chinese medicine. And so she often used to, she was a very inspirational speaker as well, and she used to finish a lot of her talks with the two Chinese symbols that you would write to write the Chinese word crisis. And in China, you don't write words depending on how they sound, but it's the meanings of the words that come into the writing. And so the two symbols for crisis were danger and opportunity, and that together meant the word crisis. And she used to say, you know, if we can help people turn the crisis of cancer into a way to find the opportunity that it brings. And I think that really speaks to your thing about beginnings here. And it's not, sometimes that can sound, too much, and in a time when, as you say, you're at the beginning, the beginning of your diagram, which actually says endings, where you're in the shock and the denial, it can feel a bit much to be said, oh, kind of, where's the gift horse in this, and where's the silver lining? But actually, that helping people find the small threads towards those new beginnings can actually really, I've seen time and time again people tell me that actually with time and with the right support, they were helped to find opportunities that might not have been there had this not happened to them. So I think is that what you're saying in a sort of different way? But yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That says exactly what I was trying to say. Brilliant. And it leads us on to the next slide really wonderfully as well, Catherine. Thank you. So I think I'm really pleased that actually the conversation's following some of the thoughts, because sometimes we don't know what that new beginning is going to be. And often if you're working with coaches in a corporate or a sports perspective, that they'll work with SMART goals. Let's set some goals that are going to be specific, they're going to be measurable, they're going to be action oriented. I can never remember them. Action orientated, real, and timely. I think that's one of them. That'll do for today anyway. But sometimes, when we're working with people who are at the start of this life-changing event, that's totally impossible to know. So often we're working with people with what we call in the service emergent goals, which is let's set a direction of travel and see how that develops as we go along there and how we get there. And I think that lends itself kind of really interestingly to some definitions of coaching. And I've taken these from a professional charter for coaches. And again, just the first thing to know, as a professional coach, if you're looking for coaches, that they should really be working to some sort of ethical or professional charter, because we're an unregulated profession. But if the people that you're talking to don't know about this, I think that's an interesting sort of pointer along your decision choice about, is this the sort of person I should work with? And there's two definitions of coaching they have in that charter. The first one, and I'd say it's a continuum. So is facilitating, facilitating the client's learning process by using professional methods and techniques to help the client to improve what is obstructive and nurture what is effective in order to reach the client's goals. It's a really powerful definition, really does say what we do, because often sometimes it's how do we negotiate barriers and get around barriers, and some of the techniques that you may well hear here from as a coaching approach will be motivational interviewing, which is let's focus on the motivations and really build what's really important to you in the world to sort of challenge this goal. And often that can be around a behavior or something that needs to often change. And this type of approach is used an awful lot in health and wellness coaching, particularly in when people are trying to make lifestyle changes in their life in order to support their health. So it could be things around diet, it could be in an organizational setting, it could be leadership behaviors. There's usually something very, very specific that we would be working towards. Another definition is partnering with clients through a thought-provoking and creative process that inspires them to maximize their personal and professional potential. And that's very much this area of working with these emergent goals, which is, well, we don't quite know what's going to happen. But actually, let's work together, through a process, if we can call it that, which is going to maximize your ability to deal with that and set a course that's going to allow you to be, as coaches, we often say, the best version of yourself. And unfortunately, still haven't found a better way to say that. But it's for how we can develop and be well, because when we're well, we're actually using the skills and resources we have to meet the challenges that we're facing. And me, that's the essence of coaching. And my own personal mantra is, it's my role as a coach is to optimize performance. Whatever that performance is to take part and live well. And I think it fits really nicely into this idea of along this continuum of coaching. Mentoring may be another area of work that you may hear, particularly from an organizational or a business sense. And mentoring, is a developmental process again, which may influence through a transfer of skill or knowledge from a more experienced or a less experienced person through learning, dialogue, and role modeling. And I think that's a really interesting framework for me as a non-health professional, to say some of the self-help techniques that you might be able to sort of develop from Penny Brown and other centres. They fit very strongly into a mentoring role for me, because actually somebody can show you how to use the tapping, and actually you can, it's a transfer of skill or knowledge that can be very, very powerful for you to use as you go along. What to expect is a conversation. And it's a conversation where you will be doing most of the talking, and your professional client will be doing a lot of listening and reflecting back. And in a broad sense of the what to expect, there's kind of three elements of a coaching conversation, which is what would you like to achieve in the conversation? What are your options? What are you going to do about it? And it's as simple as that. The skill in all these things is the rigor of that conversation, because the conversation from a coaching approach is creating that space for our clients to think, often quite deeply, around things, and to reflect and paraphrase what we're hearing in service of the client reaching their goal. Differences between coaching and counselling? Any suggestions from anyone? It's a real great question that many in our profession are still struggling with, actually, because you'll have individual practitioners who are also counsellors and coaches, and some people now call themselves integrated. That's the wrong term. Personal consultants. So they work with a person using a whole variety of different methods and modalities to support an individual. I think that one of the biggest differences for me between a counselling conversation and a coaching conversation is actually the coach and the client probably form more of a coactive team. So there's something about what we do together to reach the goals, rather than me supporting you in that space of distress. And of course, if you ask 10 different coaches or counselors, you'll probably get 20 different answers. But it's a very similar process that we go through, one of talking and listening and reflecting. And but there's probably a little bit more of a coactive process that goes on, particularly in my process, because I may share some experiences in service of you reaching your goals. EFT could be one of them. So maybe kind of that might be a bit unusual for counsellors to share these things, depending on their orientation and knowledge base. The other thing I would just say is that counselling is kind of a heterogeneous, broad spectrum profession with lots of different specialities. It's the same in coaching. Coaching, or many of us will have different sort of elements around how we work.